Andy, good morning to you, and thanks for taking the time. Roku right now is down just under 10 cents. This is not a name that is really ever unchanged. So to see it unchanged on the session is an odd sight, but basically hanging out here around 166, high end of the range for the recovery.
Yeah, it's great stock, great company, just a real winner story. And you can see what Roku has going for it. First of all, it's riding a massive consumer tailwind in people talking about streaming and using streaming video services. That is up and to the right with acceleration over the last couple months that normally you wouldn't see in the summer, which is very, very good for Roku because they're in a real good spot. They're best of breed. And when we look at this, when we look at Roku compared to peers, you can really see over the last few years how they've really just taken a really dominant position, especially when you compare to how they started against, smart TVs in general, Amazon Fire, Google Chromecast. The only competitor really there is Apple TV, and that gets a little bit of a bump because of their original content. And from a device perspective, it's definitely Roku's world. They're installed on most of the TVs that are produced or sold in the United States today. So this is just a company that's executed extremely well. We see purchase intent mentions, which means people talking about buying a Roku device or installing or getting a Roku login for the first time. Those are up 47% year over year, and those were pretty tough comps. This was a company that did really well last year as well. And the other thing that I'll point out just real quickly, because I think it's kind of a dark horse in Roku's arsenal, and that is their Roku branded channel. And we saw mentions of that and people talking about watching that up more than 118% year over year. And I think that's a real key for Roku. They're doing a good job creating devices, but now they're also starting to bring people content that they want to watch where they control the advertising to those users. And so that'll be very interesting to see. So we think Roku has really great adoption, extremely high consumer happiness, a consumer tailwind behind it. The only thing that's worrying going into this report is those ad dollars and whether those are drying up from the big multinational companies as we head into whatever it is, day 165 of coronavirus fears and lockdowns. Some ad budgets are probably shifting.
Yeah, Andy, I think you have just talked about the one potential negative that's going on with Roku, and that is an overall drop in ad spending. That being said, now, Andy, this is not 60 Minutes, but we're going to put you a little bit on the spot today, and we're going to ask you about Roku. Looks like it's the winner, Andy, and I'm going to give you, the more research I do on Roku, the more I read about it, the more I look at it, they have basically annihilated their competition in terms of the way they do, and our viewers who think that maybe this might be a fad. I read something today that really was a light bulb moment for me. Remember, this is connected TV versus linear. And let's say there's an ad on for Procter & Gamble and Tide, right? You get that on your Roku TV, and an hour later or a day later, you get an ad on your phone to go to your local Target to buy Tide at a discounted price or a promotional price. And that is what TV can never do. And so what my question to you, Andy, is Roku the winner? Are we looking at the clear winner in this connected TV market? Because, sports was always the moat, right, for live TV and linear TV. That's pretty much evaporating now as we sit here. But the question really is that I want you to comment on, is Roku clearly going to be the winner in all this?
I think they are. All signs point to that. I mean, when I look at Roku, I really look at it through the lens of, like you said, that personalized advertising. The way that this company is approaching streaming video, it reminds me a lot of the way Google kind of transformed or did transform advertising online. It used to be, before Google came around, really it was banner ads everywhere, and they hoped that you happened to click on their billboard. Then Google figured out they could learn a lot about a user based on what they search for over time. They could then deliver targeted ads to that person, more and more targeted, based more and more on what the individual reacts to. And Roku's in the same spot. Like you said, it's not just, hey, I'm watching, this or that show, and so therefore I must be in the demographic that wants to see this ad. Roku's actually building out a profile anonymously and masked on every user in their database, and so they know really well what your interests are. It reminds me of Pinterest also in a lot of ways. So that's the differentiator. And from a technology and software perspective, they're clearly winning. There's a mile between them and the closest competition from a device and software perspective. Now, things in technology can change really, really quickly. And so you don't want to say this is always going to be the winner. But as of right now, Roku to me looks untouchable in the space of essentially streaming advertising and creating that personalized value proposition for both the advertiser and the user, because everybody wants to see ads. If you're going to see ads, you want them to actually be meaningful and impact you and be something that you're interested in. So I think it works both ways. It works for the advertiser, it works for the user. And yeah, the long story short is Roku is the winner as of right now, and that lead is expanding every single quarter.
And Andy, for those who are maybe doubters of companies like Roku, given, all of the uncertainty still in this space, some reasons that they should be considering that maybe it is the winner beyond everything you've said is, one, look at its ability to adapt to a changing market environment. It went from a primarily, the hardware, set-top box, make a non-smart TV smart TV, to this software ad company that's a powerhouse. And look at its competitors. I mean, we just had that chart up from your data. You got Apple on there. You have Amazon on there. You have Alphabet on there. And under smart TVs, one of the major players is Samsung, which we know is a major player in electronics, as well as, LG and everything else. And it's the winner right now. And so to me, combine that with the fact that you said, the majority of TVs being sold have Roku technology embedded in them. These different companies are acknowledging that. They're saying, we'd rather license Roku than build it in-house ourselves for cheaper. That's saying something almost more important than anything else.
Yeah, I've drawn a lot of analogies, but you could think back to Microsoft as well. Eventually every PC that was made came with Windows installed, and that gave them everything that they needed to become, a multi-decade powerhouse that continues to this day. There are reasons to be skeptical of Roku from a valuation perspective right now. There are reasons to be skeptical of it short term from a ad environment and marketing spend perspective right now. So I'm not going to sit here and say that Roku is always a great buy and will always be a great buy. But what I will say is Roku is the clear leader from both sides of the aisle, from the user perspective, from the advertiser perspective, from the television manufacturer perspective. They're winning all of the races simultaneously. And you've got to respect that, and you've got to start looking. I think it would be wise to start looking for opportunities where short-term disruptions to the overall ad spend marketplace could give us opportunities to get into, what still is a young company in a fast-growing sector with a lot of consumer tailwinds behind it.
And Andy, kind of final thoughts here. This is a space that was kind of already where trends were going. We talked about how, COVID-19 and the lockdowns have really accelerated a lot of trends. This is absolutely one of them. And if you're looking for a way to kind of reflect an investment into streaming and the transition from legacy cable to streaming, a company like Roku that benefits from just more people watching streaming services is something to consider. I mean, you don't need to pick the right winner. You just pick the one that, basically directs you to the content. But you also mentioned something. I want to get your final thoughts on this, Andy, around the Roku channel and how that's maybe kind of the dark horse for this. Is that, and is there anything else that Roku is doing that can be the next big thing for Roku in terms of growth?
Well, I think it's more of the same. I actually think that the Roku channel proves Roku's value proposition in terms of if people are watching it twice as much as they were a year ago, that means that they do understand what the user wants to see, and they're doing a good job of programming for that. I think that's kind of like the litmus test case for Roku. You know, it's one of those things. We first started liking Roku around $40 in January, I think, of 2019. Now the stock is at 160. And actually, I feel like the story's gotten even better. That's pretty rare, but the story's gotten even better because they have just executed in every way in a really strong manner. And you know, clear leader. The theme has gotten better. You know, like you said, COVID did provide some demand pull ahead and accelerated existing trends. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when, you know, people are actually back out and about and at football games and things like that to streaming. I think there could be a little dip there, but you know, long term, this company has just consistently demonstrated ability to execute at the very highest levels and beat back all competition.